time for a $1,200 gaming PC build that you can actually buy the parts for right now. In today's GeekaWhat video, I'm going to run you through all the components I chose and why, the build process from start right through to finish, and then I'm going to test out this machine with some of the biggest gaming benchmarks out there. So buckle in, get subscribed if you aren't already, but let's do this. Let's start off by building as many components onto the motherboard as possible before moving on to our graphics card very shortly. Now you'll see here I've actually gone for an Intel platform for this system, and there's a very clever reason why. The brand new Core i5-11400F is an absolute steal. It blows anything that AMD have got out of the water for the price point. You can either have a 4-year-old Ryzen 5 1600 or an 11400F. Now don't get me wrong, the rest of the Intel lineup is not particularly great, the upgrade paths aren't fantastic, but this CPU is definitely a diamond in the rough when it comes to 11th generation processors. This chip isn't overclockable either, so we haven't got to go out and buy an expensive Z590 motherboard, which is where this comes in, the B560M AORUS Elite. This board from Gigabyte has 4 RAM DIMM slots, support for the latest Gen 4 NVMe drives, and all in all comes in a really nice package. There are some more affordable B560 boards out there, so if you'd like to save a little bit of cash, I'll link those options in the description below. You do get a stock cooler included with the 11400F, but it's frankly rubbish, especially compared to what you'll find with the AMD stock coolers. A $25 Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition will fix that problem for us nicely though. And even with this added cost, our CPU still comes in way less than any comparable Ryzen options. For the RAM or the memory, I've gone for a 16GB kit of Corsair's Vengeance Pro RGB. This is only 3000 MHz, but remember, Intel CPUs aren't really that bothered by memory speeds, so this is going to work fine. Storage is the last component we're going to install onto the motherboard, and this comes in from Seagate. This is their Barracuda 510 and comes available in either a 500GB or a 1TB drive. At least those are the capacities I'd recommend for this system. It's not quite Gen 4, so it's not absolutely rapido. However, it is Gen 3, it is nice and quick, and we'll pop some speed tests on your screen now. I feel like the Cooler Master Hyper 212 range is just one of those legendary products that will never die, and should never die to be clear. This is the latest refresh. It's got, a bit of RGB on it. It's nice and blacked out, but it is a really great cooler. It will get those temperatures way lower than what a stock cooler would and actually help increase your frame rate. And you can learn how in a recent video in the card section now, where we compared different coolers and different frame rates and saw what difference the temperature actually has on your frame rate. Really interesting video. Go and check it out, as I say, in the card section now. Ladies and gentlemen, I have made a little bit of an oopsie. Now you can see our M.2 drive is going to go in just below the cooler here. It will still technically go in, but with the cooler overhanging, it's probably just a better idea to put this in first, then do the cooler afterwards. See, I'm sharing my mistakes so you guys don't have to make the same ones. This board does actually come with a little M.2 heatsink as well, which should just help to keep our M.2 SSD nice and cool. This is more important with the latest Gen 4 drives, which do run hotter, but still nice to see for a Gen 3 user. Looking pretty good in my opinion. So our motherboard assembly, as we're going to call it, is nicely complete, and we're going to move this into, you guessed it, our case choice for this system. This is the XPG Starcat, and it's a really nice chassis. You can get it in black or white. I've gone for the white version because it stands out a little bit more. It's got addressable RGB and actually fits really nicely between the budget $50 cases and the more expensive $110 chassis. This kind of $70 area is quite underserved. It's quite difficult to find good cases, and for a build like this, it's perfect. It gives us a bit more money to pour into other components like our GPU, but also gives us plenty of features and doesn't make it feel like we're overly scrimping it either. Let's go ahead and take the Starcat out the box and see what we're working with. Really nice, clean, sleek chassis. I might spruce it up by adding a couple of RGB fans in as well, but before we do that, we're going to go ahead and install our AORUS motherboard. So you can see here, it's actually got a built-in rear I/O shield, so that's one less thing for us to worry about, and it's great to see this on the more budget-oriented chipset. We've also got a pretty strong I/O here with more USB ports than I think I've ever seen on a slightly more affordable motherboard, as well as, of course, USB-C, Gen 2, and we've also got 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. So super speedy from AORUS, really, really nice motherboard, and it will install into our case really simply, a little something like this. Tighten it down corner by corner, bit by bit, don't over tighten the screws, and you're pretty much good to go. And with that nicely wrapped up, we can move on to the power supply before finally looking at the GPU in just a moment, so please do hold tight. For the power supply, you want something modular, you want something well rated, you want something reputable, and the Cooler Master MWE Gold 650 ticks all those boxes super nicely. It's fully modular, so you only plug in the cables you need, with really good efficiency ratings and plenty of wattage for a few upgrades later down the line. The all black cables as well look really good, as you can see now, as we plug up to our CPU and our motherboard power connectors, which are really the only two things in the build so far that need any power. Lovely stuff! And with the power supply in, it brings us nicely onto the graphics card. Now, James, you said this was a $1,200 gaming PC that you can actually build right now, and that's true. We've got around $550 to $600 left in the budget for our 2060. Now, while that is a lot of money to spend on a 2060, it does make a $1,200 build like this one possible. If you want to go for a cheaper graphics card like a 1650, 1660 Super, or even a 1030, believe it or not, that we featured in a recent video in the cards section now, you can do, and then upgrade a little bit later. But the 2060 is a fantastic card when it comes to 1080p and even 1440p gaming. It does of course support ray tracing, which we're not overly bothered about, but we're more interested in DLSS. DLSS is, in my opinion, the main differentiator between this and, say, a 1660 Super, which once again we featured in a recent in-stock build guide, which you can watch in the cards section. DLSS is an AI-backed resolution scaler from NVIDIA that helps you to really up your frame rate. It's supported with some of the biggest games out there, and the 2060 is the entry-level DLSS card. We'll jump into some more detailed gaming benchmarks a little bit later, but as I say, this build really is open for future upgrades. Not that I think most of you are going to need it. People forget just how powerful the 20 series graphics cards are, and how much newer they are as well than something like a GTX 1650, which must be like, what, 4-5 years old at this point. This specific GPU design from Gigabyte is one of my personal favourites, but any 2060 you can buy for a reasonable price point is what I'd go for. Used GPU pricing does appear to be dropping, only a little bit, but it is going down, and we're going to talk more about that in an upcoming video, so get subscribed for that if you aren't already. Let's go ahead though and install our 2060 in the build and see what it looks like. And just like that, the GPU is installed. All we need to do is give it a single 8-pin PCI power connector and the build's pretty much done. But don't go anywhere, because we're going to dive into the performance in just a moment and see whether you should really spend $1,200 on this system. First though, let's see how good it looks in an epic glam montage in typical GeekaWhat style. I'll see you in a second. Awesome stuff. Now we've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, let's see just how well it performs. We've tested a wide range of titles as ever here on the GeekaWhat channel, from the latest AAA games to the most popular, slightly older titles. And we're going to kick things off with one of those, GTA 5. At 1080p in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, we got 158 frames per second. This was a really impressive result, and as ever was tested with both NVIDIA FrameView and MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner. Watch Dogs Legion is next up, and at 1080p high settings with DLSS enabled, of course a key feature you do get with the 20 series cards, we got just shy of 100 frames per second. I would avoid ray tracing if I were you on a 2060 in Watch Dogs and go for that slightly higher frame rate instead. Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War gave us an impressive 95 frames per second on average at 1080p high, with once again support for DLSS helping move us along quite nicely. Apex Legends is the next title, and at 1080p we got 117 frames per second on average, with our 99th percentile number of 101 suggesting some really consistently great frame rates. If frame rate's what you're after though, our next title might be the one for you. It is of course Valorant. At 1080p high settings we got over 300 frames per second on average, which is absolutely mental. Fortnite is the next game on the list today, and at 1080p competitive settings, this is a title you guys always ask for, and I'm glad to report just over 167 FPS on average. Not a bad result. Of course, 1080p competitive consists of everything tuned down to low, but the render distance set to far. Finally then, the last title is Call of Duty's Warzone. Now at 1080p medium settings, I was actually pretty surprised by this card, giving us 99 frames a second. That was of course tested in the multiplayer Battle Royale, which is I'm sure the game mode you guys are going to be using. And on that note, that pretty much wraps it up for not only the benchmarks today, but for the whole video. If you enjoyed this one, give it a big old like rating, get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in though, and as always, we'll see you soon.